What's up, guys? I know we missed last week. Thanksgiving got kind of in the way, but we are back. Unfortunately, we're down a man today, but me and Tim are going to hold it down, so stay tuned.
Fantasy football, you dealing with the best. Keep it hype, authentic, this ain't nothing like the rest. With the Armchair Fantasy Show podcast, give advice for all the listeners to improve your stats. Yeah, we live on goingfor2.com. Tuesdays and Fridays, this is what you want. Talking dynasties and daily drafts, and we just getting started, that ain't even the half. Yeah, so go ahead, tell your friends to join. Going for two, cause no one remembers the extra point. Hey, goingfor2.com, the Armchair Fantasy Show.
What's going on, guys? All right, welcome to episode 122 of the Armchair Fantasy Show. I'm your host, of course, Geoff Lambert. You can find me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. We, of course, are here every Tuesday and Friday night on Facebook Live, Periscope, and YouTube. Syndicated in all major podcast networks and streaming in the Going for Two app for iOS and Android. We are down a man tonight. Gerson, unfortunately, got stuck at work, so we will not have Gerson on tonight, but Tim was kind enough to just come on through, and we're going to hold it down and try to take Gerson's spot for tonight. Tim, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Yes, we're going to have to carry the show a little bit tonight, but I'm ready to go. I really like this slate. This is what I call a bait slate, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So,
yeah, I think this is probably the better slate that we've had in a while. I think we've had a few that are kind of GPP only, where you couldn't really play cash, but I think there's some good value on this slate that you can actually play some cash games this weekend as well.
I agree. Usually this late into the year, I'm kind of off cash games. I'm pretty heavy on GPPs. But I agree. I made a cash lineup in about 5 minutes tonight. So
yep.
I think that kind of gives me an idea. I think cash is pretty straightforward this week.
Agreed. Before we get into the slate, though, I got a couple program notes that I want to mention here. So the DFS show, unfortunately, will be ending next week. We go through week 15, basically, and the DFS show will be done for the season. It's a sad moment. We all kind of cry a little bit towards the end there because we don't talk to each other, at least on the podcast, for a whole year, basically. So that show will be ending. The season-long show will become a dynasty show. Me and Ryan will start talking about some of the draft prospects coming up here, and we're also going to be running a new thing this year. It's going to be a 4 or 5 minute video clip. We're going to do rookie profiles. We're just going to hit one at a time, 4 or 5 minutes. I'll release them a couple times a week. I think we'll record a bunch of them at once, and then I'll just kind of release them. It's going to be called the GF2 War Room, and it's going to be me and Ryan on a few of them, and I got another guy, Damian, who's a big college guy. He's going to come on as well and kind of preview the prospects for our dynasty stuff. So just to give you an idea of what's coming up here pretty soon. With that said, Tim, let's go ahead and just jump into the slate here. Let's start with the quarterbacks as usual. Who you got for your top-tier quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think you guys start with Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's just been the model of consistency this year. He's been so good. I've played him every week. I played him last week. Played him a number of weeks this year. At 7,400 on DraftKings, I still think he's within the realm of being able to pay him. I've heard some people talking about him as a cash play. I don't know if he's necessarily my cash quarterback this week. But we know that Buffalo's got a great passing defense. The way to attack them is on the ground. And, he's averaging, just a ton of yards. We got exactly 81 yards a game this year. So we obviously know he can get, huge high floor due to his huge upside on the ground. So I definitely like Lamar Jackson. He's probably my top play. This is not a homer call. I actually legit think he's one of the better calls on the slate, and that's Aaron Rodgers. Last week, we saw him kind of go off. And I think he's in an even better spot here. We always talk about play Rodgers at home, and he's playing the Washington Redskins, whose just whole defense is pretty much abysmal. But you definitely want to attack them in the pass game. Last week, Kyle Allen had 2 quick touchdowns against them before they just started to stop using Christian McCaffrey and were unable to move the ball at that point. So I expect better things for Rodgers. And then the third guy on my top tier list is Deshaun Watson. Kind of in the same tier as Lamar Jackson. We saw obviously how well he played against the Patriots last week. He's been a guy I've played a number of weeks this season. The Denver Broncos are not nearly as good of a matchup for him, but I think he's been played really well at home. And outside of Chris Harris and Von Miller, there's not really anybody on that defense that really scares me. The Texas O-line worries me a little bit. but I think that they're going to scheme to give him enough time in the pocket. And even if they don't, we've seen him escape out of the pocket and be able to pick up these yards on the ground too. So those are probably my 3 top-tier guys this week.
Yeah, I think I've got a couple of those guys on my top tier as well. The only one that I have that we didn't mention, and it's more of a tournament play, because he hasn't been, his usual shelf lately, and that's Pat Mahomes. Of course, going to New England, that's going to be a high-scoring game there. I think Pat Mahomes, when he's on his game, is matchup-proof. The last few games, though, he hasn't been his top self, so his price has come down a little bit. So you can afford him now. You could probably afford to get the stack that was sort of the big one last year with Kelsey and Tyreek Hill. You can get that stack pretty cheap, as far as what they're usually priced at. And I think that could be a good tournament stack as well, because that game's going to be high scoring. There's going to be a lot of offense in that game. I know the Pats defense is really good, but so is the Chiefs offense. So I think that Andy Reid's got some things cooked up there. I think they got some issues at running back, we know. A couple injuries we'll talk about later on in the show that, could cause them to pass the ball even more. But yeah, I think Pat Mahomes is going to be a little under the radar kind of guy you could put in there. And like I said, you can't get him cheaper than $7,000. I don't know what the last time he was, where he was $7K on DraftKings. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think I remember the week he came back, and I played him that week. So I agree with you there. The last couple of times these two teams have squared off, they've had really high totals. I think like 60 or 70 points, something like that. So I agree. It is the highest over-under on the board, but I still think that game very well could go over the total. Even though New England is obviously more known for their defense this year than they have in the past. One guy I don't want to skip over just because I know he's going to be popular this week is going to be Kirk Cousins. I think the biggest difference for me between Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins is that I feel like when Minnesota gets up, they're perfectly content to run the ball and run out the clock. Whereas I feel like Aaron Rodgers, especially at home, will just, put the foot on the neck. You know what I mean? Just go full throttle and not really care. So they could be up 14 points and he'll still be throwing down the field. So I think that's probably the difference. I think it's a little bit better, maybe game environment for Kirk Cousins, but I really like Aaron Rodgers in this spot. So that's kind of it for my top tier guys. But I agree with the Mahomes call.
Yeah, I like
that. He's going to be a little under the radar this week and should have a good game.
Yeah, I like that Aaron Rodgers call. And just going to your point where they should be running it sometimes and they're throwing it. I can't remember what game it was, but I know you were pretty upset that they're like 2nd and 1 at the goal line and they threw 3 straight passes, and of course you end up losing that game. So yeah, they love to pass out there. I don't know what it is, but I mean, for fantasy purposes, that's what you want. You want them throwing the ball. You don't want them to run the clock out. And there's a lot of talk in D.C. right now where they're thinking the Redskins might actually upset the Packers, which I don't see happening. But if the Redskins can stay anywhere near close to the Packers, they're going to continue passing and continue scoring, and it could be a huge game for Aaron Rodgers for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if Brian Clark is watching this game. He's the Redskins truther. He thinks that they're going to upset every week, but he might be leading part of that noise. I don't see how they lose. But I remember the Eagles game is the one you're talking about.
Yep, that's right.
And consider the Eagles just lost to the Miami Dolphins. That loss hurts even more than it did at the time. But the Eagles have just fallen apart. The NFC, I call it the NFC least.
Yep.
That division is just so bad. It's really sad that one of those teams gets an automatic home playoff game.
Exactly.
It is what it is, man.
Yep. And just so you know, Brian Clark is listening, and he just said that the Skins are winning, but Rodgers will still do decent. So he's predicted a Redskins win there. All right, good stuff. All right, let's move into the mid-tier, Tim. Who do you got for some of your mid-tier quarterbacks this week?
All right, first guy, he's only $100, I think, less than Deshaun Watson, but I still kind of moved him into that next tier, and that's going to be Jameis Winston. This is a guy, I think I read that outside of your 49ers and the Baltimore Ravens, the third team in terms of points per game is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We know that you can throw on Indianapolis, and I expect Jameis to kind of light it up here. I like some of his receivers, obviously, we're going to get to later. I think, I like Watson better for $100 more, but especially for tournament stacks, I think it sets up kind of really well for Winston in this game. It very well could go high total on this game, so I definitely want to mention Jameis. It's second or third highest. I think second highest over-under on the board right now. I think it's tied. So, I mean, definitely one you want to look into in terms of stacks. I don't know if he's as much of a cash play, but the next two guys on my list are cash plays, I think, for a lot of people this week. One of them I already saw was mentioned in the chat, and they're both $6,000, and that's Sam Darnold and Ryan Fitzmagic. Obviously, we saw that Darnold, did not have a great game last time these two teams met. I think he's been playing since then. He was kind of still having a little bit of a sticker shock, if you will. And then obviously last week, Fitzmagic just carried me to the promised land, man. I had Devontae Parker in something like 40% of my lineups. And so watching that game with him just throwing it up to Devontae Parker was just magic. I loved it. So I definitely like both of those guys. I think Darnold is probably going to be the more popular play, but I think you could just as easily play Fitzpatrick and feel good about it. I actually did my first head-to-head draft of the year. I've been wanting to do one, and I finally saw some guy in DraftKings group named Randy take me up on it, and he drafted Darnold. And I was very tempted to just counter him with Fitzmagic, but I ended up going with Watson instead. So I got to stick on my board, and that's what my board told me to do.
Nice.
But I think those two guys are very playable at 6K. They have a ton of upside, and obviously they have great stack options.
Yep, good stuff. The only one that you hadn't mentioned that I have on my list is on the other side of the field from Jameis Winston, and that's Brissett. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, like you said, I mean, they're a good defense run against the run. So I think that, Marlon Mack's going to have trouble kind of running the ball against this Tampa Bay defense. And they're going to force Brissett to pass the ball. I know they don't have T.Y. Hilton, but they are getting Paris Campbell back. And I do think that with Paris Campbell and Zach Pascal, I think it can be good enough. Doyle's a pretty good tight end as well. They can move the ball with him. And I think Brissett's going to be forced to pass the ball to kind of stay up to date with with the scoring on Tampa Bay. So Brissett at 6.1. We know how much Tampa Bay gives up passing yards. I mean, they just give up like it's candy. It's ridiculous how bad they are against the pass. We get good against the run. So Brissett's my one mid-tier guy that we hadn't talked about already.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that call too.
All right, let's go ahead and move into the value quarterbacks here. You got any values that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I got two guys on my list here. One of them is I know a guy that me, you, and Garrison have all talked about as terms of a season-long streamer. I know it's tough. We don't really talk season-long on this show, and that's Ryan Tannehill. He's only a couple $100 less than Darnold and Fitzpatrick, but I think this is also sets up to be a good game environment for him. He's somebody that I think you could definitely play in tournaments, or if you really needed the extra couple hundred, I think you can legit play him in cash. And then the other guy I have is on the other side of the ball with Derek Carr for the Raiders. I think it's actually a little bit better for Sam Darnold. They're predicted to win on the road, but we always talk about how home underdogs seem to overproduce sometimes, and we know that obviously the way you want to attack Tennessee is through the air. So I also really like Derek Carr. He's probably the cheapest quarterback I'm going to have any exposure to. But I probably won't have a lot of exposure because I'm much higher on some of the higher end guys this week. But I've seen some lineups that have Derek Carr at quarterback and they can just stack the middle. So it's always a possibility if you can get 15 to 20 points from your quarterback and hit all the other spots that you can take down a tournament and obviously do great in cash. So
yeah, definitely.
I think
Go ahead.
No, that's really it. I mean, like I said, I think that if I could find a couple $100 to get up to Darnold or Fitzpatrick from Tannehill, I just like that game environment a little bit better. But if you're kind of looking at that last guy and you're thinking, do I want to drop down? I don't really feel comfortable about it. I think you could go with Tannehill and with some level of confidence. Yeah,
I like that call as well. There is one more quarterback on my value list, and he's way down there. He's definitely risky for sure, but that's Andy Dalton at he's 5.2K. I think this game has some sneaky upside scoring. I think both these offenses have potential to be really good. I mean, we saw early on with Dalton and John Ross is coming back, so he has that deep threat back. I don't know how healthy he is, but just that threat could open up the middle of the field for Tyler Boyd. And Dalton, he's not a great quarterback, but he is serviceable. He can move the ball. Obviously, on the other side of the field, you got Baker and OBJ and Landry, who've been disappointments for most of the year, but they have the potential to go off. So this could be, I think it's a 41.5 over-under right now, which seems very low to me. I think it should be a little bit higher than that. But I do think there's some sneaky upside here with Andy Dalton being a 5.2, because just like Carr, you can stack a lot of options there with Dalton. So he's my only other value quarterback that I have. Anybody else you want to talk about before we move on to tight ends, Tim?
Not really. I think that's probably it for me. I mean, I've seen some people mention Tom Brady. I'm not really on him. I think this is going to be not a great Brady game. I think Drew Brees is very tempting at 5,900, but your 49ers defense is legit, so I don't think there's going to be a lot of point scoring. I like the pass catchers more for PPR than I like Drew Brees to score touchdowns. So I think that's pretty much my core of those five 5 main guys and then a couple values.
Yep, I like that. All right, let's go ahead and move into the tight ends then. Who you got for your top tier tight ends?
All right, this one's for you, Garrison. All right, nice. So my top tight end this week is Darren Waller. They finally started getting him back the use that he was getting before, and I really like that. Tennessee is one of the teams that you want to attack with tight ends. He got back with 9 targets last week. He was consistently getting, between 5 and 7 targets, and then he kind of jumped up last week against KC, and I think he's going to see similar targets against Tennessee this week. So, last week I played KC and then Tennessee this week. So I really like him. He's obviously a little bit expensive, but, I think that he's somebody you can really kind of expect to get a high target volume from, whether or not he gets a ton of yards on the back of it. I know Austin Hooper is back this week, but at 6,000 on his first game back, I don't really know how I feel about that. George Kittle is always a good play, but outside of Travis Kelce, there's nobody really else that I want to pay up for this week other than Darren Waller. So I think Waller's my top guy. As far as the, close to 6K guys, he's going to be the one that I have the highest exposure to.
Yeah, so the 2 guys you mentioned there at the end, Kelce and Hooper, I actually have them on my list, but they're more tournament plays for me because they do have that tremendous upside. I think Hooper will go lower owned because he's coming off an injury. They don't know what he can really be capable of. But if you have the amount of lineups you're going to run, if you got enough of them there, get Hooper in a few of them, I think he can go low owned and you can get him at a pretty good matchup there. Kelce, of course, can go off at any time with Patrick Mahomes and catch 2 touchdowns. So obviously he's always going to be in play. And then Mark Andrews going up against Buffalo. We talked about this before, but the Bills are a good defense, but their secondary is more on the outside. They got Trey White out there. They're good against the receivers, but that middle of the field is really where they're vulnerable. And I think they're 22nd DVOA versus the tight end position. So I think Andrews can be a sneaky play there as well. People are not really thinking about him, but at 5.6, he's a decent discount on some of those high price guys. So I like Andrews as well.
Yeah, I do want to make one note on Travis Kelce. A big part of my analysis is assuming that Jason McCourty for the Patriots plays, because I think that they're going to do something similar to what they've done in the past. If McCourty sits, they're going to have to put Stephon Gilmore on Tyreek Hill, whereas in the past they've used Stephon Gilmore to cover Travis Kelce. So if he ends up getting matched up with a linebacker or one of those secondary defensive backs, I think that obviously improves his matchup a lot. It really depends on how the scheme is. But I think if McCourty plays, then Tyreek Hill will see a good amount of him, and then he'll see a good amount of Stephon Gilmore, and they'll kind of mix those 2 guys up.
Yep.
So I definitely want to keep an eye on the McCourty injury, whether or not he plays. That kind of mixes things up a little bit for me.
Good stuff.
The next guy I have on my list is Hunter Henry. This is a guy that's kind of been, when he first came back from injury, he was just lighting it up, getting consistently 8, 9, 10 targets, and then last week he fell down to 3. I think part of it was just the way that game went a little bit. They were obviously riding Melvin Gordon a lot, and then, they weren't throwing the ball a ton. I wonder if part of that is a shift in their kind of philosophy over the last couple of games. They're going to try and run the ball more than they're going to throw. But I still think against Jacksonville, one of the best ways to target them is target their linebackers. And so I really like Hunter Henry. So he's 5,100. So he was the next guy I had on my list. And then a few hundred less than him is probably my favorite tight end play on the slate, and that's Jack Doyle.
Yep.
I had a lot of exposure to Jack Doyle last week. I didn't play him in cash because I think once we got closer to Sunday, it became obvious that Higbee was the better cash player, at least for me. I wouldn't have told you that he was going to score 29 points or whatever he scored. I think that's ridiculous, but obviously I was not going to complain. So that obviously worked out for me. We're going to obviously talk about a guy here in a minute that's going to be a cheaper option. But I think my favorite kind of mid-range option this week is Jack Doyle. In addition to the fact that he saw 11 targets last week, and T.Y. Hilton is still out.
Yep.
He's going against Tampa Bay, who's an even worse team against tight ends than Tennessee was.
Yeah.
Obviously they're terrible against any pass catcher, but I've always kind of targeted them with tight ends because they give up so many points in the middle of the field.
Yep.
There were even a couple times last week where it just looked like Brissett didn't even look at anyone else. He took the snap, he looked around, saw where Jack Doyle was, and then just threw it.
Yep.
Yep.
Like
it was his first read on numerous plays. So whenever you're telling me a guy at 4,600 against a bad defense is going to be a first read and has a realistic projection of 10 targets, I think you just got to play him then.
Yeah, and he just got paid too, so he's going to come out and show out as well because he just got his money. I think a 3-year contract, so good stuff for him. Real quick, we got a question on the chat room here on YouTube. I think it's one of a newer viewers, so I want to make sure we get to it. It's actually a season-long question, but I know you play season-long as well, so we're going to go ahead and answer this question anyway. So he needs one running back and a flex. I think is how he said it. He needs one running back and one flex. So standard scoring, so that's not PPR. His options are Joe Mixon, Kenyon Drake, Darius Geis, Keenan Allen, and Austin Eckler.
Ooh,
it's a tough choice. I was looking at it while you were talking, like, it's a tough choice to pick there.
Yeah, I got to agree with you there. I think the play for me, I really like Darius Geis this week. Obviously, we saw how much usage he got last week, and the Packers are not a great team against the run. It's hard for me to not say Austin Eckler in that spot, but I think that I'm just so much higher on Melvin Gordon this week. It's tough for me to go that route. But I think between Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen, I think I'm probably going to go Keenan Allen.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. It's good that we're in agreement. Darius Geis there, I think he's going to get, the coach for the Redskins, he wants to run the ball, and then run the ball some more. So I think that there's going to be plenty of carries to go around there for the Redskins. They want to keep that Packers offense off the field, obviously, so that's the good way to do it. Keenan Allen, I think, has got some good touchdown upside. He's been targeted quite a bit recently in the end zone because I have him in my Dynasty League as well. So he's been coming on lately. He's traditionally been a late closer. He typically comes on at the end of the season and does really well. So hopefully he can kind of continue that trend there and have a good game for you. So, yeah, I think we're both going to go Darius Geis and Keenan Allen here for you.
Yeah, I think if it was PPR or even half PPR, I'd probably take Eckler. But standard scoring, I think that Geis has the higher touchdown projection for me. Agreed,
100%. All right, so my mid-tier tight ends is where I'm at. So I got Doyle as well. Obviously, I think he'll be the most popular play. Another guy that I got is Vance McDonald, and I got this hard-hitting stat right here that I copied. Let me look it up. Plays Arizona. That's basically it. That's my hard-hitting stat. I mean, you basically, whoever's playing the Arizona Cardinals tight end, you just plug them in and they'll catch touchdowns. It happens every week. I think only twice this year it hasn't happened. I mean, some guys that you don't even heard of start catching touchdowns. I think Ross Dwelly had 2 touchdowns against them as well. So basically, tight ends play the Cardinals. You just plug them in. So Vance McDonald for me at 4.3K. You can't beat it. He gets a touchdown and a couple catches, and you're good to go. All right, let's go ahead and move down into the value tight ends here. Who do you got for your values?
All right, this one kind of hurts me to say because I have been off this guy all year, but I think he actually makes a legitimate option here, and it's more as a punt because I know you're going to talk about the other guy, and that's O.J. Howard. He's only 3,200, and last week he saw 6 targets against Jacksonville. Again, Indy, we mentioned earlier, they're a team that you kind of want to target. They're not as bad as, say, Tampa Bay or Arizona, for example, but I definitely think, he's one of those guys where it just kind of goes up and down. He'll get 4 targets, he'll get 6 targets, he'll get 2 targets, he'll get 7 targets, and I think that's why he's 3,200, you know? I think if, this one is more of a play on talent, but we know, as we found out in that Atlanta game, I think it was, if he messes up, man, they're quick to pull him. So if you play him at 3,200, you definitely know that that's an option, but I don't know that anybody else in the range, other than obviously the guy we're going to talk about, is a legitimate play in that range that could be a salary saver that could still, 4 or 5x his salary. So that was the one guy I saw in the lower end that gave me had a little bit of intrigue for me.
All right, so I got 2 guys on my list. The one guy you were alluding to, of course, is Gesicki on the other side of that game. We've seen him get a ton of targets lately. I think he's basically a receiver right now, and Fitzmagic is looking his way a lot. He's getting tons of targets. His touchdown upside is there. He's a big guy. He's very athletic. He's fast. He can take it to the house at any point. He hasn't had that monster game yet that we look for from these kind of guys, but I do think that monster game is coming. It could be this week against Tampa Bay. So Gesicki at 4,000 is definitely in play for me. And the other guy I got is...
Gesicki's going against the Jets.
Sorry. What was I saying? I was talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, wasn't I?
Tampa Bay, yeah. Yes. Just to clarify that for everybody.
Yeah, good catch. I'm a little under the weather if you haven't noticed. My voice is kind of jacked up, and I'm still kind of getting over the medicine head. And the other guy I got is Ian Thomas. Greg Olson's already been ruled out. Ian Thomas, I meant to pull up his stats before we got to him because I know he had a couple targets last week when Olson went out. Hold on one sec while I pull that up. Yeah, he had 4 targets last week, which is I think his his high for the season. Basically, I think before that he had 1 target was his only thing. So I think that at 2.6K on DraftKings, he's definitely in play. Obviously, tight end's the position you want to punt, and if you're going to punt, you might as well go all the way to the bottom. So Ian Thomas in a game versus Atlanta, and I think Atlanta's pretty bad against the tight end as well. So I think that he's definitely viable this week if you want to get some.
Yeah, I don't think he has the upside that Higbee did last week, which is tough to say for Tyler fucking Higbee. But anyway, I mean, Ian Thomas, like you said, he's a minimum $2,500. I kind of have him a projection for about 4 to 6 targets, and I don't know that he's somebody that's going to, give you 15, or anything close to 20 DraftKings points. But I think the main thing that he gives you, like you said, is the ability to fit in all of the other guys. I think that there are some good value plays on this slate, but I think that he's the one that you can kind of fit everybody else that you want, really, if you plug him in.
Yep, agreed.
So,
he's kind of in that. He's kind of in that Rhett Ellison sort of range where he's just going to catch a touchdown. That's all you really need from him, and just to get those higher price guys in there.
Yeah, I mean, 4 for 46, and he nearly 4X's his salary, which I think is well within I guess that's what, basically, 4 for 56 then. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But either way, I think it's well within the realm of possibility, and like I said, that helps you get up everywhere. The only thing that gives me pause on Ian Thomas is I like a lot of the other Panthers this week, and so I think at best he's the 4th and maybe 5th receiving option on that team. So I think that he very well could see another game like this, gets you 6 DraftKings points, and then you're thinking, man, I wish I would have paid up for Doyle or something like that. But,
good call.
As I said, same kind of thing about Carr. If you're saying, man, I just can't play Derek Carr, I'd rather pay down and save money at tight end and pay up at quarterback, I completely get it. Just know that I don't think he has a huge ceiling.
Yeah, I just saw the note there from Scott in the chat room on Facebook. He said that the Panthers came out and said that they're going to do a tight end by committee approach, so that could definitely hurt his value if they're going to do a multiple tight end sets there. So something to watch out for sure. I think he's still viable at 2.6 or 2.5 or 2.6, whatever he is. So I think he's still viable. Any more guys you want to talk about before we move on to the halftime show, and then we'll come back after the half and talk some more people?
I don't think so. I mean, I've seen a few people talking about Noah Fant. I'm not really big on him this week. Again, like I said, I think you either pay in the 4,000 range or you go all the way down. That's just kind of where I'm at on it. There's really nobody else in that mid-range or even on the low end that I like. Agreed.
All right, guys, quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll tackle the receivers and the running backs. Hold tight.
In the unpredictable world of fantasy sports, when all hope seems lost and chaos and confusion rule, one hero will rise. And change everything. Going for 2.com. Because no one remembers the extra point.
All right, welcome back. I'm here with Tim minus Gerson tonight, and we're about to talk some running backs for your Week 14 DFS lineups. Tim, we'll go to you first. Actually, you're the only person we can go to. So this is a force of habit.
I got you, man. I got you.
Let's talk about your high tier.
I mentioned earlier that I called this a bait slate. And what I mean by that is I think that DraftKings purposely priced down some of these running backs to kind of give you pause when you're making your lineups thinking, is he too cheap? Do I need to find a way to put him in?
Yep.
And that's kind of how I feel about it. So we're going to start right at the top, and that's Christian McCaffrey, right? Coming off his worst game of the season, DraftKings lowered his price $200. And I feel like they could have kept him at 10.5 and not made a change, but they lowered him $200 just to kind of give you that pause, like, man, does it make a difference? And to me, the answer is no. I am a little bit concerned, obviously, with the coaching change, if there's going to be a change in his usage. But I would assume that any decent coach would realize that he's the way that their offense moves the ball.
Yep.
You know, obviously, you know, we know he scored 33 points in the last game against Atlanta, 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, they only scored 3 points in that game, and he still ended up with 33 DraftKings points because he got 11 catches on 15 targets. So I don't know that we're going to be able to see 15 or project anything close to 15 targets again. But I think that he has a reasonable, percentage of scoring a touchdown, and so that may offset some of that. But I think that, if you can find your way to McCaffrey, you should still go that route, just because he's got such a high floor. You know, I think last week was a little bit of a fluke. In that Redskins game I mentioned, they basically fed him in the beginning and then just kind of went away from it. And in the last drive of the game in garbage time, they were like, oh, yeah, I forgot we can throw the ball to Christian McCaffrey. So I expect to see some more of that this week. So he's obviously my top guy. The next guy down, I got a pretty significant price hike this week. Well, first of all, I want to mention Dalvin Cook because I don't want to skip over this. It's obviously one of the biggest news points on the slate. All indications are, as of now, we're Friday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, that Dalvin Cook is going to play.
Yep. Right?
If Dalvin Cook is not going to play, or if there's any news that he's going to be a limited role, he's absolutely for right now, he's not in play for me. Even if they say he's 100%, I don't know that he's in play for me.
Yep.
Detroit is a terrible rush defense. We know that. But to me, it's just, I can't do it. Not for 9,500. You know, I know he scored 30 points in their last matchup against each other, but I don't know that I'm going to believe he's 100%.
Yep.
Okay? So unless they say he's only going to get 30% or 40% of the touches, I don't know that I can play Madison either in anything but a few tournament lineups. So I know we're kind of skipping down to value, but I think that's the biggest news point on the slate.
Yep.
So just keep an eye on that. Obviously, it's the biggest news on the slate. If Cook is ruled out, Madison is lock and load. Right? Low 4,500 running back against Detroit at home, 13-point spread. Just go for it, you know? So moving right past him, the guy that I alluded to earlier with the big price hike this week is Derrick Henry. So in the last few weeks, Derrick Henry went from 5,700, 6,400, 6,900, 7,600, and now he's up to 8,200. That's because he's come off 3 monster weeks. Everybody says it's Derrick Henry season. The weather starts getting cold. Derrick Henry takes over. And it's hard for me to just completely skip over him this week. I really like him as a play. I just think that this spot doesn't set up as well for him on the road against Oakland. I think that they're going to, as I mentioned earlier in the game, early in the show, they're going to try and make Ryan Tannehill win this game.
Yep.
You know, he's obviously shown that he can run over linebackers, 3-4 linebackers, carry them into the end zone, you know. Yep. But at 8,200, it gives me a little pause. Because then you need at least 24 points to pay off his salary. And that's not exactly a walk in the park, especially for somebody that doesn't catch a lot of passes.
Right, exactly.
So for $400 less, I would much rather play Uncle Lenny, a.k.a. Leonard Fournette. So the Chargers are also bad against the run, but this guy's pass game usage this year has just been incredible. And that's the biggest reason that I think he's a better play. Last 2 weeks, he's had 23 targets, 12 in week 12, and then 11 in week 13. And, you know, I mean, that on top of his running game usage is just, it's McCaffrey-like, you know. He doesn't have the upside that McCaffrey does. I mean, he's had a 36-point game. He's had a couple of high 20-point games. But I don't know that he has that floor. But, I mean, anytime you're talking about a guy that has a 30-point ceiling for sub-8K, I think you definitely got to be looking at him.
Yep, definitely. I like that call a lot. I think at one point in the season, I don't know if it's still the case or not, but Fournette and Christian McCaffrey had almost the same amount of touches. It's just Fournette wasn't getting those touchdowns, so McCaffrey was getting all the touchdowns. So I think that that usage is just ridiculous for Fournette. So yeah, I think that's a great call there. The only guy that I had that you haven't talked about already is Mr. Nick Chubb. Of course, going up against that Cincinnati defense, we know how bad they are. Everyone's kind of worried about Kareem Hunt and how much workload will he take away, but it hasn't affected him at all. He's still getting his 20-plus touches a game. I think 2 weeks ago he had the most touches that he's ever had. I think 27 rushing attempts. Of course, when they get down close, he'll be the guy they hand the ball off to. So Nick Chubb is a great play, I think, at what was he 8K against Cincinnati. And like I said, I think this has got some sneaky upside as far as scoring goes. So I think there could be some more scoring than what Vegas predicts, and that could lead to more touchdowns for Mr. Nick Chubb. So he's my other guy that I like in the top tier. Let's go ahead and move into
one more note on Leonard Fournette that I didn't mention that you kind of alluded to a minute ago is that he has scored 3 touchdowns this year, which is, first of all, that's incredible. He's only scored 3 touchdowns with the amount of usage he's gotten.
Yep.
All 3 have come on the road.
Oh, wow.
So he's playing this game at home, and so I feel like he's finally going to get a home touchdown this week. I know that's kind of like, narrative street, if you will.
Right.
First of all, before we skip over this, I want to mention this. Narrative Street absolutely worked out for Cole Beasley. We haven't really recapped since the Thanksgiving show.
Good call.
I hope all of you played Narrative Street Cole Beasley because obviously that worked out for you. So I don't know that this is the same kind of spot, but I think that they're going to try and get Leonard Fournette a touchdown in this game. Seems like lately he's been getting carries inside the 5. He seems to go backwards. So hopefully he catches the ball at like the 5 and runs it in instead. But I don't think that he can get the amount of volume that he gets and not eventually score a touchdown at home. Yeah,
I agree. I think there's some kind of positive regression coming there soon because it's just too many touches to only have 3 touchdowns. It's ridiculous. It's kind of like Zach Ertz for tight ends. He for the longest time he was like leading the league in tight end targets, but he had 1 touchdown. He finally got his 2 touchdowns in a game, so he's kind of coming back to the mean a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those things where something's got to give eventually. So I agree 100%. All right, let's go ahead and move into the mid-range guys. Who you got for your mid-range running backs?
So the next guy on my DraftKings is baiting me list is Alvin Kamara. At 7K against your San Francisco 49ers. Pretty much it's been this year the only way to score on the 49ers has been on the ground with the running backs. We obviously saw that game Thursday night where Kenyon Drake gave them the blueprint, right? How do you score against the 49ers? You score with, run it, and then catch the ball out of the backfield. And who does that better than Alvin Kamara? So, with the first in the league in passing defense at 134 yards per game, 22nd in the league at rushing defense at 116. That doesn't obviously count how many targets he gets, 10, 9, 8. So 7K, I think, is like a bait. Like he's just cheap enough where you're like, if he was 8K, I'd have a little bit of pause,
Yep.
But at 7K, I'm like, that sounds pretty good.
Yep.
So that's where I'm going. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to Alvin Kamara this week. I think that if, Sean Payton, I have a lot of respect for him as an offensive mind. And so I think he's going to look at this game and he's going to think, okay, I know how to beat them. I feel like they've even been kind of tapering his usage almost in anticipation for this game.
Yep.
But he's been getting an average of about 10 to 12 touches on the ground, and then, like I said, 8 to 10 targets in the air. So that kind of volume for a 7K guy, give me some of that.
Yes, sir. Definitely. Some of the guys I got in my mid-tier, I was just looking up some of his touches for the last 2 games, is Mr. Benny Snell going up against Arizona. We know, again, how bad their defense is. He's had 16 and 21 touches in the last 2 games. Connor, I believe, has already been ruled out, and if he hasn't been ruled out officially, I know he's pretty much doubtful to play, so I think Snell...
He's out.
He's out? Okay, so I think Snell gets the workload once again. He's definitely come up in price a little bit. He's getting a little bit more expensive, but I still think he's a viable candidate there. It's, 6.1 on DraftKings, so I think that he is a good play against Arizona. And the other guy that I had on my list is, of course, Mark Ingram. We know that the way you beat Buffalo is to run the ball. They're just not very good against the run. And Mark Ingram is just getting a great workload. And because he has Lamar Jackson back there and that read option, you don't know who's getting the ball. He gets that hesitation from the linebackers, and that's it. That's all he needs is that one little crease to sort of break that run. And I think Buffalo's going to struggle there a little bit. So definitely like Ingram this week as well against Buffalo at 5.9.
Yep, I like that call as well. One guy I can't skip over because he was the 3rd guy on my DraftKings baiting me chart is Melvin Gordon. I mentioned him earlier in the show. He's 6,400. He was 6,400. He was 6,900 2 weeks ago, and then last week he only scored 13 points, but he got 20 touches. He's still 6,400, and this week he's got to go against Jacksonville, which we know you beat with the run, right? So I think that this is a game that sets up great for Melvin Gordon. I expect him to be one of the chalkier plays on the slate, but I think he makes a great cash play and still has a ton of upside for tournaments. I haven't really looked too much at ownership percentages. I tend to not look too much until it gets closer to kickoff.
Yep.
but I expect he's going to be one of the higher-owned running backs on the slate. But I think you got to try and find some exposure to him. Like I said, don't get me wrong, I like Austin Eckler too, especially in the DraftKings PPR format. But I think this is Melvin Gordon week. I think if he's going to have one of those vintage, 20, 25 touch games where he scores over 100 and maybe gets 2 touchdowns, this is going to be that week.
Yep.
So I think that you may end up being Sunday afternoon. They play in the afternoon game. The slate's over and you're thinking to yourself, or you were way up in the money all morning, right, all early afternoon, and then that afternoon game hits and you're just watching him score and you're like, well, there goes my money, I don't know if he's quite, hammer status, but this might be the week he's the hammer. You know what I mean?
Yep, agreed 100%. So the only guys that I had we talked about all my guys in the mid-tier, so I'll go ahead and move into my value guys. I only have 2, and they're from the same team, and it's going to be more tournament than anything because we don't know who's getting the workload. It's kind of a toss-up. Both Darrell Williams and Damian Williams are going to be out for the Chiefs, which basically leaves LaShawn McCoy and rookie Darwin Thompson, as their running backs. They did sign what's his name that used to be there? I can't think. I'll have to look it up. I can't remember his name. They just signed somebody, but he can get a lot of touches. I think Darwin and McCoy. I think McCoy's 4.4K and Darwin is 4,000. Tournament options, like I said, because you don't know who's going to get the workload there, but I can see them splitting 50-50, and in that offense, 50-50 is good enough to be a top RB at 4,000. So definitely like those 2 guys as well.
Oh, Spencer Ware?
Spencer Ware, yes. Thank you, Kyle. I see it on YouTube there. Yep, Spencer Ware got signed there. I don't think he's going to get not carry it very much, so it's going to be the Darwin Thompson and McCoy show for sure. So those are my 2 value plays. Who do you got for your value running backs?
Well, one guy I put a question mark to. He's actually a mid-range play, but it leads into my value play. Is what's going on with Aaron Jones. I think that's kind of, like I said, we don't really talk much season long, but I think if you made it to season long and you're in the playoffs right now, as a lot of people are, if you have Aaron Jones, I think you got to have a little bit of pause, right? I think you have to play him. Chances are you're not going to have somebody better than him to play, especially where he was drafted in a lot of leagues. But like I mentioned earlier, this just feels like the type of game where Rodgers is just going to sit back and throw it the whole time. So, obviously I think Redskins are, 20th, something like that, DVOA against the run. So it very well could be one of those Aaron Jones games. They get up a few games and just give him 20, 25 touches on the ground. But I think one of my favorite value plays this week is on the other side. It's Jamal Williams. They're almost in a near 50-50 split at this point. Yep. He's almost $2,000 cheaper. But what I like, especially on DraftKings with the full PPR scoring, is he gets so much usage in the passing game. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks ago against your 49ers, he had 8 targets. Another reason I really like Kamara is the amount of, like I said, they said, when they were game planning, they said this is how we're going to use them. Plus, they got way down, so that probably hurt too. But last week, even with them up on the Giants, they continued to give him touches. He got 14 touches. So I definitely think Jamal Williams is an interesting play. I'm definitely going to have some exposure to him. James White. I really like James White this week. I know it kind of sets up to be more of a Sony Michel game, but I think that they kind of learned last week, the Patriots did, that offense just looks so much better when James White is on the field. So, again, you never really know what the Patriots are going to do. It's like Pop and Belichick. You always think you have an idea what they're going to do, and then they do something completely different. Yep. So I could be sitting here, like I just mentioned, and it'll be Sunday afternoon, I'll be thinking, damn, I knew it was Sony Michel. You know what I mean? But if it's me, if I'm playing one of the 2, especially with the PPR scoring, give me James White. He played, I think it was almost 80% of the snaps last week. Again, some of that may have been game script against the Texans, but they're basically the same price, $5,600, and I like the upside of James White much better. And then for $100 less, another one of my favorite plays on the slate, and I'll have a lot of exposure to this guy, is Devontae Freeman. He kind of has been taking over more and more of the role in that offense since he got back. And I think last week he saw Carolina just get absolutely run over. And I think that's, I don't think he's necessarily the same profile running back, but I think this also sets up for a great spot for him. And he was the 4th guy I had on my DraftKings troll list or DraftKings bait list. Where at 5,400, he's right at that price where you're thinking, okay, I could get like Fournette or Kamara with Gordon and then Freeman and feel like I could comfortably project 60 touches for my running back. Yep. And be out of it for under 20K for all 3 guys, Yep. So, It's very, very tempting for me, you know?
Yeah, we got a question just speaking about Devontae Freeman from Kyle on YouTube. So he wants to know, is it wise to go with RB from the same matchup? So could you do like a CMC and Devontae Freeman from the same game?
Yes. I think there are certainly spots where you can do that. Obviously, we saw a couple weeks ago, Leonard Fournette and Derrick Henry was pretty much the way to go. And I think that could be, there are certain things I think you got to pick your spots. But I think that, yeah, CMC and Devontae Freeman is one that I definitely think you could do.
Yeah, I think also because they're both.
There aren't too many of on this slate.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot. But I think because they're both pass catchers too, it kind of helps you a little bit in that sense as well. So, yeah, I agree. I think you can definitely go RB here with McCaffrey and Devontae Freeman, especially in a game that should be fairly high scoring, I think. So.
Yeah, and then next guy, the last guy I want to mention here, and this is a shout out to Scott in the chat. Jets coach Adam Gase is unsure if Le'Veon Bell will be available Week 14 against the Dolphins. So this is obviously one of those Sunday morning check out, if he's in or out. But Bilal Powell at 3,500. If we get the idea that he's going to get the bulk of the workload against Miami, I mean that's a lock and load. Garrison, if you're watching this, I know he'll never let me forget the week that Bilal Powell was chalk and I faded him and he went off for something like almost 10 times value, something like that. So I will not make that mistake again. So Bilal Powell will be in a lot of my lineups, assuming Le'Veon Bell is out. I think he's pretty much lock and load status against Miami at 3,500.
Agreed.
I mean, we've talked about this on previous shows. DraftKings has been very, very aggressive in pricing up backups this year, so that if one of these injuries occurs, it's not just a lock and load where they end up 70-80% in tournaments. And I think that's exactly what Bilal Powell could end up being if that is the case. So, yeah, I think that's probably that one in the Madison. Just imagine what this slate looks like if Madison and Powell both end up being the chalk.
Yeah, that.
You know what I mean? It's going to be it's going to be Lamar Jackson and all the wide receivers we're about to talk about here.
Yep, exactly. And just to go back to Bilal Powell, there's a couple games ago, because I'm a Le'Veon Bell owner in my Dynasty League, so I watch him pretty closely. And there's a couple games ago where they gave Bilal Powell a lot of touches for some reason, and he still got some juice. I mean, he's an older running back that's been kind of a backup, but if he gets that full role, he can still do some things because he looked kind of deadly. I was kind of like, oh crap, did Le'Veon Bell get hurt? Because they got Bilal Powell in there for about 5 or 6 snaps in a row. But luckily, Bell came back for me. But, yeah, I think Bilal Powell definitely is in play for sure if Le'Veon Bell does end up missing. All right, let's go ahead and talk to the receivers that you just alluded to here. What you got for your receivers?
All right, so, again, I don't think this is too much bias, but my favorite receiver on this slate is Davante Adams. Last week, I had him in about 40-50% of my lineups because I just thought he was too underpriced at $7K. Obviously, they raised him $1,000 to $8K. But I still think he's one of the better plays on the slate. I think that they're going to scheme to take away Tyreek Hill, and Michael Thomas is going to have a tough matchup against, like I said, San Francisco's top pass defense. He does have an excellent wide receiver cornerback matchup, and they don't call him Can't Guard Mike for nothing. But I'm going to take the $300 discount at home for Davante Adams. So last week I played Davante Adams and Devontae Parker. Alex astutely pointed out I went double Devontae. So this week I think I'm going to go double Devontae or even triple Devontae.
Oh,
Devontae
nice.
Freeman and Devontae Parker. So.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think that may end up being a lineup I just make just to do it. Throw it in a few GPPs and just call it my triple Devontae lineup. But I do like Michael Thomas. I do. I just think that I have Adams slightly projected above him just due to game environment.
Yeah, I like that. And then
the only other high-end guy I have is Stephon Diggs. No Adam Thielen. Obviously, we know that they're projected. They're at home. He kind of beat up Detroit last game, 8 catches for 143 and didn't even score a touchdown. He still had 24 DraftKings points. He is obviously going to see Darius Slay, but he's proven he can beat, with his speed, top-end speed, he can beat almost any corner in the league. So I'm not too worried about that. I still, like I said, he's third on that list. For me, it goes Adams, Michael Thomas, and then Stephon Diggs. But again, if you're making tournament stacks and you want to do somebody, you want to do Kirk Cousins or stack with Stephon Diggs, something like that, I completely understand. It seems like Kirk Cousins, which I mentioned earlier, always goes off on the weeks that you don't expect him to go off.
Right.
I don't expect him going to have a ton of ownership this week, even with the highest total on the board. But I think if they end up scoring 30-plus points, then Stephon Diggs will have at least one, if not two, touchdowns there. So.
Yep. So, guys, if y'all been listening to the show, Tim has now told you to play Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, Devontae Adams. I have a feeling when we get to the defenses, he might mention their defense as well, because he's basically mentioned all the Packers so far.
No, I just think the Redskins defense is terrible.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Little preview, I don't want the Packers defense. No.
All right. All right, the only guy.
Speaking of, I didn't mention it during the running back section, but I do like Darius Geis as a value.
Yes.
We mentioned him a little bit earlier in the show when we were talking about the season long. I don't know why I skipped over him. I think he's a good play as well. I actually think I like him a little bit better than Jamal Williams just because I expect that he's going to get most of the workload. But if the Redskins fall behind, I think that this could end up being a Chris Thompson game.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the only concern I have there. But, Geis just looked so good last week. And like you said, they want to run the ball. As long as that game stays close, they're going to give him 20 touches or approaching at least 15, in my opinion.
Yep.
So at 4,900, 5K, whatever he is, I definitely think he's in play. So as you said, if you're doing an Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams stack, and you want to bring it back with Darius Geis, I'm all in for that.
Yep. Good
so
stuff.
Anyway, moving back over, I said I like Stephon Diggs, and that's kind of the end of my top tier. So
all right.
Do you have anybody else in your top tier?
Yeah, the only ones that I have. So basically, if you want one of these guys, is get a quarter. And on one side of the quarter, write Evans. The other side, write Goodwin. And then flip it, and whatever it lands on, play that guy. Because one of those two guys are going to go off. Your guess is as good as mine as who it's going to be. But either one of those guys, obviously, with Winston there and that high total game should be good. And then you mentioned Tyreek Hill as not being a play there. I actually have him as one of my plays, again, tournament only, because of that big play ability. I think our secondaries have been a little bit banged up. Richard Sherman might miss this game. He's questionable. Jaquiski Tart, our safety, is also injured. He's going to be out. He broke a rib. So we're a little bit injured on that secondary. If Breeze gets any time at all, I'm sorry, Breeze. Kansas City. What am I talking about? I'm going to. I don't
know.
I'm on a tangent tonight, man. I don't know what's going on with me. I'm talking about the New England Patriots. Sorry. Tyreek Hill, I was looking at MT and 49ers, and it just went on MT for some reason. Tyreek Hill versus the Patriots. Obviously, they have a good defense as well. Gilmore will probably shadow Tyreek Hill, but I do think one play, Patrick Mahomes can pay off his salary pretty quickly. Like I mentioned before, it's definitely tournament only, low owned stack, and you could probably even put it with Travis Kelce as well. I think by the end of the show, I'm going to lose my voice too because it's going. It's almost gone. So it's not only am I high on some medicine right now, but my voice is getting ready to go.
Yeah, I do want to make one note since you mentioned Richard Sherman. He was left off the final injury report. It does look like he's good to go. And one interesting thing I thought is, he's kind of back to his role that he had in Seattle where he doesn't really shadow. He just plays aside.
Yep.
So I mentioned earlier I have a lot of faith in Sean Payton to just say, okay, we're going to try and not put Michael Thomas on that side. So I know San Francisco has good corners. They're going to find a way to scheme around Michael Thomas, but I don't know how much Richard Sherman. I know some people mentioned that they thought that Sherman was going to shadow him. I don't expect that to be the case. He hasn't really done that a whole lot this year. I may end up being wrong there, but I know I had seen that mentioned a few times in certain places, and I just really don't think that's going to be the case. But I do think that he is going to see some Sherman.
All right, good stuff. Let's go ahead and move into the mid-tier, guys. Who do you got for your mid-tier?
Yeah, so I don't really love the mid-tier at wide receiver this week. I think I like the top-end guys, and then I like the values. But there is one guy I wrote down, and that's Cortland Sutton. I think he's had one of the better kind of years for one of those emerging guys this year. Last week, Drew Lock, first game with him, and he scores 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
The volume wasn't as high as you might have liked to have seen, but it says a lot when you get into the red zone that your quarterback is looking for you, So I think that he's, Houston, we know you attacked him to the air. You attacked him with number 1 wide receivers. I expect that they're going to get behind. They're going to have to throw in this game. So I think all the kind of, everything lines up for Cortland Sutton to have a big game. And so he's kind of the one guy that I saw in that mid-range that I really wanted to attack. Yeah. I mentioned Devontae Parker earlier. He's kind of on the edge at 6,900. I expect that to be kind of a higher scoring game. And as we saw last week, Ryan Fitzpatrick will just throw it up and let him go get it.
Yep, exactly.
So,
I had two guys in my mid-tier. Let me make sure I get the matchups right this time before I go off on a tangent again. A mental note, I need to not take medicine and then drink beer because I think that's kind of messing me up here. But I got DJ Moore going up against Atlanta. We mentioned, he's a pretty good play. He's a target monster. He's finally getting the touchdowns now because, for early in the season, he was getting all the targets but wasn't getting the touchdowns. That's now come around. He's got some positive regression there. So I think versus Atlanta, he can be definitely good. And then Tyler Boyd. I mean, he came back with Dalton last week and had 10 targets. We know Dalton looks his way quite often. John Ross will be back to take that safety at the top, so I think Boyd can get another 10 to 12 targets and be viable as well at 5.9K. And like I said, it's a sneaky high-scoring game, I believe. I think this is going to be a total higher than what Vegas expects it to be, so I think Boyd can definitely be in play as well. All right, let's move into...
And, can I...
Go ahead.
You know what, actually, I did want to mention one guy. I kind of want your opinion because he's right on the edge. And that's James Washington. How do you feel about James Washington this week?
It's tough because he is playing the Cardinals. He's had some pretty good games recently, but you never know what you're going to get from Mason Rudolph. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like he kind of he kind of had to deal with Devlin Hodges last week.
Yep.
It seemed like that was his go-to guy. Hodges is going to get the start again, so he is going to get quarterback. I guess that was your medicine moment there again.
Yep. Once again, man, I apologize, guys. I'm in La La Land right now.
But yeah, I said I hate to go narrative street again, but they said last week that they took the day off together and went hunting, and then it's same thing. It looked like every time Devlin was in a spot where he had to just throw the ball up, he was throwing it to James Washington. So 4 for 111 is kind of an unrealistic stat line. I think we saw the one long pass for the touchdown. It literally missed the guy's hand by like a few inches and just kind of fell right into it. So I don't know that we can project something like that, but anytime you tell me that he's going to be a quarterback's first read, I think that, as you mentioned earlier, they are going to scheme to get Vance McDonald more involved just because of the way that Arizona plays defense. But at 6K, I think he's really interesting. He's kind of on that edge of value where I think that he could have a big game. But he's had a few big games this year. He had a 20-point game, an 18-point game, and last week it was 24 points. So, yeah, we've seen Arizona give up some big games to wide receivers, and if he's going to be their first option, I think he can still be a great play. All
right, good stuff. We'll go ahead and move into the values here, and I'm going to do a guy that I actually wrote up on Fantasy Pros to make sure that hopefully I get everything correct this time. A.J. Brown at 5.3, playing against Oakland. I found a cool website just recently that gives a top explosive play percentages, and the Oakland Raiders give up an explosive play per pass attempt at 13%, which is tied for the highest with the Bengals. And A.J. Brown, of course, is a big play receiver. So when you put those two together, A.J. Brown, Oakland Raiders, with Tannehill playing really well, I think Brown can break one for a big one. So A.J. Brown is my value. I'm going to leave it at just one receiver right now because I don't want to mess up the matchups once again. So I'll go to you, Tim. What do you got for your values?
Yeah, one guy I really like is Mike Williams. I know I've mentioned a few different Chargers on this show, but I think that he makes an interesting play at 4,500. He's getting pretty decent volume, especially for somebody in that range. And I think that he kind of has they've been looking for him down the field. He's had longs of 56, 45, 50, 52. And if you watch the games, hashtag team watch the games, it looks like when Phillip Rivers gets in trouble, he just kind of throws it up to Mike Williams. He's just like, hey, man, I'm going to give you a shot. It's kind of like how Ryan Fitzpatrick is with Devontae Parker, except he just can't score a touchdown.
Yes.
I think I read that he had the most without a touchdown going into last week before Robert Woods, and then Robert Woods obviously had the huge game. So I don't know that I can predict a huge game for Mike Williams here, but I think he's a very interesting play at 4,500.
Yeah.
So I had two other guys written down. I guess three technically, but I want to talk about two of them together. I mentioned I really like the Jets and Dolphins game. And so obviously if you're talking about Darnold and you're going to play one of his pass catchers or both, I think you got to look at Jamison Crowder and Robbie Anderson.
Yep.
I don't think that I would play them both together, but I think that they're both in play. Last game, obviously, that they played, Crowder was much better. Robbie Anderson barely touched the ball. But the last couple of weeks, it looks like Darnold started looking Robbie Anderson's way again. So we know what kind of big play upside he has. He had 5 for 86 and a touchdown 2 weeks ago, and then last week 10 targets for 101.
Yep.
So, I mean, I don't think you can project him for 10 targets again. But if they're starting to get in sync again, you're going to want the big play guy, you know, and that's what Robbie Anderson is. But obviously, I think Jamison Crowder is a great play too. I mentioned earlier that I did a head-to-head with a guy from the DraftKings group. He took Jamison Crowder and Sam Darnold, and so I tried to counter him with Robbie Anderson a little bit.
Nice.
A little bit of game theory there. That way, if he does end up having a big game, it kind of takes away some of that Darnold from him. So I like both of those guys. But for me, just because of the big play upside, I think I like Robbie Anderson just a little bit better.
Yeah, good call. I like that as well. If you can, Tim, I got a question for you because I got a guy on my list. But if you can pull up your receiver cornerback matchup chart here, I want to know who's going to be matched up on this guy. That's Deebo Samuel. I don't know where Marshawn Lattimore is going to be lined up at, but if he's not on Deebo, I think Deebo can have a really big game here. What do you think of that call?
I do. I'm actually kind of upset that I skipped over him because just a little preview, he's in one of my stacks. So, yeah, 5,600, I think Deebo is a good play. According to the cornerback matchup chart, he's going to be seeing a lot of Eli Apple. They expect that Marshawn Lattimore is going to be on Emmanuel Sanders. Is he getting healthy? Do you know where he's at?
He's healthy. I mean, I think he's as healthy as he's going to be the rest of the season. He's not 100%, but who is at this point in the season? You know what I mean?
That's true. So, assuming that this plays out the way that he expects it to, he's going to see a lot of Eli Apple, who's actually been pretty good this year.
Yep.
I mean, considering just a couple years ago he was so bad that the Giants couldn't wait to get rid of him, and then that first year he was the guy that they picked on when you played New Orleans.
Yep.
He's been fairly good this year.
Yep.
I still think that you want to attack New Orleans in the slot. But the interesting thing is Sanders, Bourne, and Samuel, all three of those guys move around. They don't just really play on one side.
Yeah.
So I think if he's going to get some matchups against PJ in the slot, it's obviously going to work out for him. But I think that he's going to see more of Eli than he would Lattimore.
Yeah, so, I think in Jimmy G's trusting him now. If you watch that game against Baltimore, that first touchdown, I mean, he was double covered. And he just threw it up to him, and Deebo came down with it and scored a touchdown on it. So I think the trust factor is definitely there. We're going to have to throw the ball a lot in this game. I think that run defense for the Saints is pretty good. So we're going to have to pass. So Jimmy G's going to look Deebo's hand away quite a bit. Yeah. All right, so let's move.
I do have one other value before we move on.
Go ahead.
You mentioned DJ Moore, and I think that's a great play. But his price has crept up to 7,000, and rightly so. I mean, he's been getting so much volume lately. He's now up there with the top volume guys on the slate. But on the other side, I still like Curtis Samuel as a value.
Good call.
I mean, he's 4,900. I expect Carolina's going to have to throw in this game. And as I mentioned earlier, especially with no Greg Olsen, I think that he's going to get more looks underneath. I really do. So in an all PPR format, I think I can reasonably project him for about 6 to 8 targets. And so at 5,000, plus he gets a ton of red zone usage, I think he makes a really interesting value play. So he's not going to be used way down the field, or at least I don't expect him to. But with no Greg Olsen, I think that they're going to try and find him ways to get the ball underneath. And so he could, all he's got to do is, fall into the end zone or something like that. So I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit too. But yeah, I mean, last week, 7 targets, 4 catches, 65 yards, and a touchdown. I think that he may see, 16 DraftKings points. That's more than 3x value.
Yep.
Touchdowns are kind of tough to predict. But I think at 4,900, he gives you a little bit of value to be able to fit in some of those other studs we talked about.
Yep, good stuff. Before we move on to the defenses, we do have one more question from YouTube from Kyle. He wants to know Curtis Samuel or Mike Williams in season long. Who do you prefer out of those two guys?
Man, that was close. I mean, obviously, I talked up both of those guys. So if this is the same league, Kyle, I assume the standard format league. Man, I mean, I have those guys really close. If I had to pick one, I think I'm going to go Mike Williams. And as I mentioned, it's just because in standard, I think I want the long touchdown more than I necessarily want the volume. But I think Curtis Samuel is a great play too. I mean, they're very close for me.
Yep.
So I think that one could go either way. I think Samuel probably has the higher floor just because of his volume. But I think if you expect somebody to break a long play, it's going to be Mike Williams. So
yep.
I know it's not a great answer for you there, but I think if I had to pick one, especially in a standard league, I think I would take Mike Williams.
I think after you take that quarter and you got Mike Evans on one side and Dewey on the other side, then write it, change it up to Samuels and Mike Williams and flip it again, because basically it's a toss up there. I think both of them are really good plays.
Yeah, let me think. Let me look at one thing real quick. Chargers are projected 23 points. Where are the Panthers projected? They're at 22 points roughly. So that favors Mike Williams as well. So like you said, it's a coin flip, and I know that's probably why Kyle is deciding between these two guys, but slight edge to Mike Williams, man, but I'm not gonna tell you I feel great about that one.
Yeah, I think that touchdown regression should come eventually for Mike Williams. I mean, the amount of targets he's had in the red zone in that area, and he hasn't scored any touchdowns, it's got to come eventually. He's got to get the breakout game, so maybe it's going to come this week. All right, let's move into the defenses now, Tim. We'll just do a couple defenses, and then we'll move on to our sick call and our stacks here. So who do you got for your favorite defenses this week?
Yeah, well, my top defense in terms of overall total value, total score, not value, in terms of raw score, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have just been amazing. They've been keeping that team afloat this year, and a lot of that is done by sacks. Last few weeks, they've had 5 sacks, 4 sacks, 4 sacks, and if we know one thing about Kyler Murray, is he gives up a lot of sacks.
Yep.
So I think that they're at 3,500. They're obviously one of the more expensive defenses. I mentioned earlier the Packers defense at 4,000. I'm not real heavy on because I do think that they do give up some points, which, again, you really are looking for sacks, fumbles, defensive touchdowns when you're talking about defensive scoring. But I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers at 3,500 make a really interesting play. So I think that they're my favorite high-end guy or favorite high-end defense if I'm going to pay all the way up.
Yep.
I think my favorite defense on the slate, though, just overall, is the Baltimore Ravens. They're at 2,900. They're going into Buffalo, which a lot of times I don't like playing defenses on the road, which also the Steelers were. But Josh Allen, I think that they're going to find a way to get to him. They're gonna try and keep him contained. And they've been solid. They obviously gave up some points to your 49ers last week, but I think that this sets up a game where they could easily score. They've had a couple games, 13 plus. And the one thing I noticed about them is they're actually scoring more defensive points on the road than they are at home because they've had 4 defensive touchdowns on the road this year. Now, defensive scoring is always tough to predict, but I think that they've gotten much better since they traded for, was it Marcus Peters?
Yep.
I think that was obviously a huge upgrade for them. Obviously, they got Jimmy Smith back. That's really worked out for them. So I think Buffalo and Josh Allen are going to have a hard time moving the ball in this game. And if they set it up in a type of game environment where Josh Allen's going to have to sit back there and throw it, 35, 40 times, that just sets up so well for them for both sacks and turnovers. So I really like the Ravens. And then I always like to do a value, and my value play. I was actually torn between both defenses on both sides of this game, but I'm going to give the edge to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, they're at home, and I feel like their saving grace this year has been their ability for especially to put pressure on the quarterback. That's kind of been their MO. And most of the games they've won this year, it's because they were able to get pressure on the quarterback. Obviously, we saw last week they got so much pressure on Nick Foles, he just completely collapsed, and they had to bench him for Gardner Minshew. I don't think that we're really at risk of seeing that from Jacoby, but I still think that they can. Indianapolis has a great line, and that's the one thing that gave me a little pause on this. Is that offensive line for the Colts is just so good, but I think that they can still get some pressure on them and get a few sacks and more than pay off that $2,300 salary. And then if you're going to take the other side of that game, we always know, as you mentioned earlier, the best pieces to match up with Jameis Winston are one of his pass catchers and then the defense on the other side.
Yep.
He will just let it go. He will fumble. Nobody has as many turnovers in the last few years as Jameis Winston, fumbles and interceptions combined.
Yep.
So the Colts don't get as much pressure on the quarterback, even though they had 6 sacks last week. But I could see them putting enough pressure on Jameis to where they could get one and run it back.
Yep.
And at 2,400, you don't need a whole lot for them to pay off their salaries. So I'm good with either one of those guys as a punt.
Agreed.
Or either of those teams as a punt.
I think I got two defenses that you hadn't talked about yet, and one of them is my 49ers. I know everybody's kind of worried about that Saints offense, which they should be. It's a good offense, but the last few quarterbacks we faced. So let's see. We got Arizona, Seattle, Arizona again, then we got Green Bay, and then we got Lamar Jackson. Those are all mobile quarterbacks, and Drew Brees is not one of the mobile quarterbacks. And we still had 5 sacks, 4 sacks. We had 7 sacks in Carolina. 5 sacks against Green Bay. We only got 1 sack against Lamar Jackson, so that obviously he's the most mobile of those group. But I do think they can get to Drew Brees. They know where he's going to be at. He's going to be standing back there in the pocket. He's not going to be running around. They know where to find him. They will get sacks. Drew Brees doesn't throw many interceptions, but he does fumble a little bit. He does tend to hold the ball a little bit, let his guys open up. And Bosa's perfected the art of knocking the ball out of there, so they can get a few fumbles too, and fumble recoveries. They can definitely pay off their salary at 2.7. And then the other one that I have is going way down to the bottom there, and that's going to be the Cincinnati Bengals at Cleveland, which everyone's kind of like, the Bengals defense is so bad, but I clicked on them. Let me pull their stats up here. So they actually have been pretty decent as far as fantasy goes, if I can get it to come up here. So over the last couple weeks, they've got a 13-point game. They got an 8-point game versus Oakland. 6-point game versus Pittsburgh, so a 9-point game against Baltimore. So I mean, they're going up against a team that's known to turn the ball over a little bit with Baker Mayfield. The offense hasn't been that great. I do think that Cincinnati, and they're so cheap. I mean, they're that rate, 2.1 I think on DraftKings, that you can you can play them, and if they get you even 6 points, you're 3 times value already. So I think the Bengals are definitely in play for tournament options as well.
Okay.
All right, man, let's go ahead and get our stacks.
And now, the stacks of the week.
All right, Tim, we'll go to you. What you got for your stacks?
All right, first I'm going to write it here on my quarter. I'm going to flip it up, and it says Mike Evans. Okay, so I'm going to go with Jameis Winston, Mike Evans, and then bring it back with Jack Doyle.
Nice.
As you mentioned earlier, I think you could just as easily go with Godwin in this spot, but for my stack today, I'm going to go with Evans. So I feel like this could be a game that sets up well for him. They know that one of the ways to target Indianapolis is deep down the field, so I think that sets up more for Mike Evans. So Jameis, Evans, and then bring it back with Doyle. And then the other one is one that you mentioned. It's Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, and bring it back with Deebo Samuel.
Nice.
I really think that works out well. If you want to go Michael Thomas instead of Alvin Kamara, you could certainly do that as well. But I think that they're going to have to get one of those two guys involved. One of the stats I saw this week is that nobody gives up more catches behind the line of scrimmage than the San Francisco 49ers. Like, so many of them go for negative yardage.
Right.
So that gives me a little bit of pause. But in PPR scoring, you're going to hope that he manages to get some yards and then obviously gets all those points. So those are two of my favorite non-Packer stacks this week. And here's a little hint. I'm going to throw another one out there for my sit call.
All right, good stuff. And then, so I got 2 stacks as well. One of them we kind of mentioned a little bit with Darnold, Robbie Anderson, and bringing it back with Devontae Parker. I think that's going to be a pretty decent stack. It's pretty cheap. Robbie Anderson is a big play receiver. Obviously, he's the big play guy there. So that's my my one stack. The other one is again, I mentioned this a couple times as well with Dalton and Boyd. I think that offense is better than people expect it to be because Dalton is a better quarterback than Ryan Finley is. So you can stack Dalton, Boyd, bring it back with either OBJ or Landry. Depending on what you're looking for. Landry gets more volume. OBJ, I think now is priced cheaper than Landry for the first time this season, and he has that big playability as well. And then you can even throw in Kareem Hunt into that mix as well, because if they do end up being a high scoring, Kareem Hunt gets a lot of targets out of the backfield. I think Hunt can be viable as well. So that's a stack that I'm looking at this week as well.
Hey, so we didn't really mention it earlier. We were talking about the wide receivers in the mid-range, but since you just mentioned them, I do want to mention that would be another one if I was making another entry on my DraftKings is trolling us list is Odell Beckham Jr.
Yeah.
Because I feel like by pricing him at 6,300, they're almost daring you to play him.
Yep.
Like, he's playing against Cincinnati. They're playing at home. He obviously is a big play guy. Jarvis Landry's had some great games this year, but he hasn't had as many, he's not as much of a big play receiver.
Right.
But, would anybody be shocked if Odell Beckham had 7 for 110 and 2 touchdowns? No.
Yep.
And at 6,300, I feel like, especially if you're somebody that runs a ton of, if you do 20 lineups or 50 lineups or 150 lineups, I think if you don't have some Odell Beckham this week, you're doing it wrong. So that's just my own personal opinion on that.
Agreed. All right, let's get to the favorite segment, the sick call of the week.
And now, the sick call of the week.
All right, man. I know you kind of alluded to it a little bit already. Go ahead and give us your sick call.
Well, I don't know, man. You're the one feeling a little bit under the weather. I feel like you should go first, man. We're going to have to write this down and lock it in. To be fair to Geoff here, he has been pretty on the ball with his sick calls this year. So everybody go ahead and write this guy down.
Yeah, all right. So my guy is going to be Mr. Paris Campbell. I know I mentioned earlier that T.Y. Hilton is going to be out. He's basically stepping into the role of the number 2, basically, to Zach Pascal. I know Doyle's there as well. But the last game he played was way back in, week 9 maybe. And they were getting involved in a lot of pass plays. I mean, he had 5 catches in that game. He got hurt in that game, so he didn't finish the game. He had 5 catches for 50 yards. He had even 3 rushing attempts in that game as well. So they want to get this guy involved. He's the kind of guy that can take that little quick screen route and then just take it to the house. He's a big play guy. He's 3,200 on DraftKings. That's super, super cheap for a game that I expect to be pretty high scoring. They have to pass to keep up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They can't all go to Pascal and Doyle. They got to go to somebody else. I think Paris Campbell is a weapon that they're going to try to use. And at that price, he's definitely viable for sure. All right, Tim, what you got?
All right, so my sick call, as I alluded to, is a Green Bay Packer by the name of Allen Lazard. I know we've talked about this guy before. He obviously is coming off a big week last week. But who would have thought, in the preseason, I know you play season long in addition to your dynasty. Everybody was arguing, who is the number 2 receiver? Is it MVS or is it Geronimo Allison?
Neither one.
You go to different sites, okay, this guy, no, it's this guy, no, it's this guy. And at this point, it looks like it's Allen Lazard. I mean, Geronimo Allison is still playing as many, if not more, snaps than Allen Lazard is. But it looks like Aaron Rodgers snaps back. Is Devontae Adams double covered? Yes, he is. Okay, let me throw it to Allen Lazard. That just is what it looks like to me. And at 4,200, I think he makes a great value. He's somebody that with some big play upside, and he gets the easier of the wide receiver cornerback matchups against the Washington Redskins. So obviously I like a number of Packers this week, but I think if I had to rank them, I think that I would even put him second after only Devontae Adams in terms of how much upside I think that they have.
Yeah.
I think Jamal Williams probably has the better floor, but I think that it may be a situation where, and don't get me wrong, I said I love Devontae Adams this week, where the Redskins may say, okay, we want Quentin Dunbar to basically shadow him, and then we're going to try and put a safety over the top or try and put him in some kind of a bracket coverage. And if that plays out, Allen Lazard should see a lot of one-on-one against Fabian Moreau.
Yep.
And if that works out, I think he can win that matchup. We saw last week Aaron Rodgers, even in snow in the Meadowlands, just drop an absolute dime to Allen Lazard. And at 4,200, man, he just doesn't need a whole lot to get you there.
Yep.
So he's not somebody I'm going to have a ton of exposure to outside of my Rodgers stacks. But I'm going to do some Aaron Rodgers stacks like I mentioned earlier. The one that I kind of was mentioning when we were going through our stack section is I'm going to have Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Allen Lazard, and bring it back with Darius Geis.
Nice.
And I think by having both of those guys or all 3 of those guys, depending on how you looked at it, that's going to give me a little bit of difference in tournaments from guys that may just play Adams or may just play Geis. So that's going to be one of my stacks this week in addition to the 2 we already had.
Nice. I don't know how you did it, Tim, but you literally mentioned every offensive player for the Packers tonight. You even mentioned MVS and Geronimo Allison. You've worked those guys in there as well.
I did, yeah. I'm not playing Jimmy Graham. I'm not playing Jake Krumero. No. That's pretty much it. And of course, we're going to be sitting here, and it's going to be like, oh, look, Jimmy Graham scored a touchdown. Yep. The one guy I didn't talk about.
Exactly.
But no, I do. I think that, like I said, Rodgers obviously I think is an excellent play. Next guy would be Devontae Adams, and then third would be Allen Lazard, and then Jamal Williams in terms of how I would rank them in terms of exposure.
Nice. Good stuff. All right, man, go ahead and give us where we can follow you at on Twitter and also on Facebook, Tim.
Yeah, so like you said, next week is going to be our last show for DFS for the season, but we are always going to be active in the DFS Roundtable on Facebook. We'll be active right up until lock. We have a lot of good conversation in there. And then I recommend everybody getting into the chat as well. I feel like we've had some really, really good conversations in the chat lately. So I certainly, if you join the group, if you're already in the group, request to be in the chat. And then if you want to get me on Twitter, it's at KetoDFS. That's KETO-DFS. I've been trying to get up my Twitter presence, so I really appreciate it if you add me on there.
Nice, good stuff. And I know Gerson's really upset he couldn't make it tonight. Obviously, he gives out his GPP plays on Sunday. I believe he's still going to try to do that this week. And, of course, Jason, his brother, gives out his cash game plays on the Facebook group as well. So definitely check that out for those two guys. They do great work. So, again, Tim, I appreciate you coming on for the two-man show. I think we did a pretty good job other than my screw-ups with my medicine head and beard. It's not a good combination, but I think we did all right. That's it, guys. Let's head out. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. Tim, get us out of here.
Do I even have to? Go, Pat, go, baby.
All right, hold on one second. I can't figure out why this won't let me. It won't let me stop. We're still live. I can't turn it off. Usually I have an end button.
End it, Jeff. End it.
Yeah, I don't understand what's going on. I'm just gonna quit it. There's no finish button, which there usually is. It's weird. All right, let's just do this.